are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military history, doctrine, and leadership practices, and then distill lessons from them that we can apply to our businesses and professional practices so that we can make them run better, more profitably, serve our customers and clients better, all of those aspects. So today is episode 5 of a series, a 24-part series that I'm doing. That's really a compilation of doctrine across all branches of the military. More and more, these days, more and more. Operations are not just, the Army or the Air Force or the Navy. So we see this with what's going on right now in the Middle East. There are 2 carrier strike groups taking part in the combat operations in Iran. But there are also Air Force planes refueling assets. There may be special operators from perhaps the Army and the Navy there as well. And so whereas in previous times, the Army and the Navy found it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to communicate. Even the Marine Corps and the Navy, who are both which are both part of the Navy Department, in past times found it difficult to communicate. Today, there is largely seamless operation between different branches of the military. And so strategy in combat operations really now it blankets over all the branches of the military, as opposed to having a separate doctrine for the Army and another one for the Navy and another one for the Marine Corps, and another one for the Air Force. And so that's why I'm doing this sort of we might call it combined arms approach to applying military doctrine to the business world. So the first section is on strategy. I'm talking about strategic concepts. And today's topic is called second order effects. So when a military operation is being planned, so it at least in under current doctrine, no decision or no plan ends with the immediate objective. So commanders ask, what happens next? And then what, right? So taking Iran as an example. Okay, so the objectives are to destroy their nuclear capability, to destroy their ability to launch and make more ballistic missiles, to destroy their ability to project terrorism into other countries in the world. Okay, those are I think there's a fourth objective. It's not coming to mind. Okay, so in planning that, presumably, and I have no I have no inside sources into the planning of this operation. I'm just using it as an example and putting some speculation in. But assuming those 3 objectives are met, there most likely was a discussion of, okay, we've met our objections, now what? Okay, and the now what are the second order effects. Okay, so The senior leadership in Iran has been killed. And in fact, I read this morning, the individual who took over as defense minister yesterday has already been killed today, right? So that's how quickly the regime is being decapitated. So presumably this is being done so that the next person nominated will think twice about essentially accepting that nomination, right? And so, okay, so now you've got a situation. The sort of maybe the second order effect is, well, now you have members of the regime who will flat out refuse to take on a leadership role unless Iran surrenders to the United States and Israel, or unless there are some negotiations opened whereby, an end to the war is one of the conditions of, that this particular individual or these particular individuals agreeing to assume positions of leadership, right? So that would be the sort of second order effect, right? And then there are third order effects as well that should presumably are discussed anytime military activity is launched. So in military doctrine, so leaders evaluate the first order effects, which is the immediate result of an action. Okay, but then they look at the second order effects, which is the consequences that follow that result. And then the third order effects are the systemic shifts that follow the consequences of the second order effects. Okay, so the idea is to avoid looking at military action in isolation and with the assumption that, okay, military objectives achieved, we're done, right? To use von Clausewitz, military action is really just an extension of political action and political goals. Okay, so military action shouldn't be used just for the sake of using military action. The purpose behind it is to achieve political goals. Okay, so this so a strike, a military action, so it may succeed tactically by a strike that succeeds tactically may have a second order effect whereby it destabilizes a region, it strengthens insurgent recruitment, it triggers a political backlash, and it alters alliance dynamics. So if we take, for example, the war in Iraq roughly 20 years ago, right? So so the first order effect was Saddam Hussein was removed from power and basically killed, right? They found him in a hole somewhere, literally, okay? But the second order effect was a power vacuum. And this was a big mistake on the part of the Bush administration, not considering, okay, once Saddam Hussein is gone, now what? Okay, because Iraq did not have Republican, small r Republican governance beforehand. It had always been essentially a dictatorship or a monarchy. And so it wasn't like there was some wellspring of Republican institutions that were going to swell up, let alone so-called democratic institutions. I mean, we tend to conflate those two types of governments, but there are no true democracies in this world, right? Democracies are where every citizen votes on every single act of the government. We don't have that. We have republics where people elect representatives who then vote on measures of governance. So that's why I'm using that term to be precise in what we're talking about here, right? So the second order effect of the war in Iraq was there was a power vacuum, and the third order effects were sectarian violence, insurgency, and regional instability. And the result was a country that previously had been in a war with Iran for 10 years aligning with Iran, right? So, wouldn't exactly call that a victory in the sense of anything long term that was worthwhile to American interests being achieved. Okay, so this is why in military planning and in military doctrine, second order effects need to be considered. Okay, again, presumably they have been or are being considered with respect to what's going on, today. So, uh, military, when they're doing planning, they hopefully, right, are war gaming outcomes. So, uh, they may have red teaming where one team is in the case of the United States, the other team is the enemy. How does this work out? What are the second and third order effects? So they model scenarios. I'm sure they're using computer modeling these days, and they map out how can things escalate and spin out of control in a way that we would otherwise not think about, but for doing this kind of escalation mapping. And finally, how will the coalition respond or react to what's going on? So you looking at the current situation, right? Great Britain would not exactly be considered an ally of the United States. Now they are letting the United States use some of their bases, but they are by no means acting as a strong ally in what's going on in Iran. Now, there may be reasons for that. There's a very large Muslim and a fairly large radical Muslim population in the UK. And one would imagine that the prime minister is afraid of that, unfortunately, right? And so, he's made it very clear that the UK will not engage in offensive operations. Even more to the point, he's using this language of we don't want to have another Iraq where there's no plan afterwards. That would tend to indicate that the UK was not brought in as part of the planning of the operation. And one can imagine that was because there was concern that the UK would leak the impending military action to the detriment of that action. There's not the kind of trust between the UK and the United States these days that there was in former times. Okay, same thing with France. Worse with Spain, right? Spain has condemned the action and has refused to let the United States use any of its bases. So, I think there is going to be, as a result of what's going on in Iran, some significant second and third order effects that may affect NATO. It may affect certainly trade relations. President Trump has already come out and said that that there's going to be no trade between Spain and the United States as a result of Spain refusing the United States to use its bases. There is a naval base, for example, in Rota, Spain, and it would typically be a place where the carrier air group, I believe it's the USS Gerald Ford carrier strike group that's in the Mediterranean right now, the Eastern Mediterranean. Rota, Spain would be a place where they would go to resupply and also to give the sailors some shore leave. So, presumably Spain is not going to allow that. I know we'll have to see how that works out. But these are the kinds of second and third order effects that typically would be examined when planning a military operation. Okay. And by the way, just because there might be some damage to an alliance as a third order effect doesn't mean that therefore the military action wouldn't be launched. It might be. The downside of not launching that military action may be of greater concern than the damage to the military alliance. The threat of Iran getting a nuclear weapon almost surely is a greater threat than damage to the relationship between the United States and Spain, for example, right? And so it may very well be that military planners advise the president, Spain is not on board with any of this. We can see in their, pro-Palestinian statements and their pro-Hamas statements, et cetera, that they're opposed to any action that we would take. And the president might well have made the decision, okay, fine. And if they do that, then we will take the appropriate steps. So the idea of understanding second and third order effects is not necessarily to avoid them. It's to understand them and make some contingency planning as to what the responses to those second and third order effects may be, so that one isn't having to respond on the fly. Okay, so that's the military side of this. Now let's look at some of the practical business applications to this idea of second and third order effects. I have 5 of them, I believe. Yeah, I have 5 here. Okay, so let's look at some things that happen in businesses that might be considered the first order, okay, and then what might be second, third order effects as sort of an exercise in how businesses, how your business, for example, might view various activities or various business activities. Okay, so number 1, let's say a business decides to do a layoff to cut costs. Okay, so for example, there was a company that laid off half its workforce. I want to say it was Square. I could be wrong about that. It was one of the financing app companies. So they laid off 50% of their workforce in one fell swoop, right? And the rationale for doing so is going forward, we just don't need this size of a workforce. Number one, we can replace a lot of it with AI technology, and rather than doing it piecemeal and the sort of long-term hit of second order effects, right? This is a company that sounds like they examine second and third order effects. We're just going to do it all at once, get it over with, and then, rebuild and move on, or adjust and move on, not rebuild, but adjust and move on, right? So the first order effect of a layoff is you have a lower payroll expense, right? You're not carrying the salary, you're not paying the salaries of all of these people. And so that reduces your payroll expense. However, a second order effects may be reduced morale among the employees who are remaining, who especially if they think there may be further layoffs, would start looking for other jobs while they still have a job, or might start leaving the company because they're concerned that there may be another layoff. And so you can see in the announcement that the company made, where they say, look, we're doing one great big layoff and that's it. I think the company was trying to get out ahead of this second order effect of a reduced morale by saying to the employees, look, we're doing this all at one time. there's not going to be multiple layers of layoffs. And so we've let go 50% of the workforce, and the 50% that remains, you're in good shape. So that's a second order effect that it appears, again, they were trying to get out in front of. But there needn't only be one second order effect. Another second order effect can be loss of institutional memory, right? So to the extent that in the example I'm using, the 50% of the employees who were laid off had information that the remaining 50% that are staying don't have, right? That's lost institutional memory. And that can be a detriment to the company. It's a very difficult issue to measure, right? Because a lot of us, we don't even realize we have so-called institutional memory. It's just things we know about how the company works, how certain clients or groups of clients operate, or how systems work, or whatever it is that this information that we have, we just have it. But and the people who are staying, they don't realize that some of that information is lost now that people have been laid off. It just has to be dealt with. Okay. Now a company can try and capture data like that, setting up systems whereby employees are regularly, sort of doing information downloads into a system, and that might, if that is a regular part of the company's operation, that could mitigate some of the institutional memory loss. But in the short term, it can be a difficult thing to do. People may not even realize they have the data. Okay. Third order effects of a layoff could be a productivity decline, could be reputational damage, and difficulty in recruiting if the company wants to staff up again. Okay, so you say, wait, how could it be a productivity decline? Well, sometimes companies lay off too many people, and now they can't handle the workload, and so they start, the people are trying to spread themselves too thin. They get burnt out. That causes a productivity decline. Okay. Reputational damage. There are people who, they don't like companies that fire a bunch of people, which is essentially what a layoff is, right? And then the flip side is, some people don't want to go to work for a company that periodically lays people off because they feel that there's insufficient stability there, right? And so again, with the I believe it's Square, but I could be wrong about that. With Square, by saying we're just going to do this one big layoff and that's it, they're trying to get out in front of potential recruiting difficulty down the road. I mean, are they going to take a reputational hit for this? I don't know. I guess we'll see what the future bodes. Will they have a productivity decline? Well, they clearly think not, because they're going to use AI tools in order to maintain, or actually in order to increase the productivity of individual employees, such that they can, half the employees can do as much as what used to be, twice as many employees, right? So cutting costs, it can increase the risk of subpar performance. And so that's why it's important to consider the second and third order effects and try and mitigate at least some of those effects to make the initial step that the company is taking, a layoff, make it more effective in its implementation. Okay, let's take a quick break. We'll come back for more. When life brings unexpected changes, managing inherited property shouldn't add to your stress. Magnum Properties specializes in probate and trust real estate management. We handle the complexities while you focus on what matters most. From property maintenance to tenant relations, from legal compliance to maximizing value. We're your trusted partner through every step. Magnum Properties, Inc., turning property challenges into peace of mind. Call us today at 213-264-4396 or visit magnumprops.com. Okay, so going back now to some of the practical business examples of second and third order effects. So automate, this is kind of the corollary to the first one with respect to Square. Automation increases efficiency, okay? But it may also increase risk. So the first order effect of using AI is potentially improved margins because each employee becomes more productive, okay? And so more can be accomplished at the same or just, slightly higher expenses, right? So if AI can increase an employee's productivity by 20%, but they're given only a 10% pay increase, so that's actually worked out well for both the company and the employee. The company is lowering its margins, or it's improving its, I should say, it's improving its margins. It's lowering its cost, but the employee is actually making more money, and it's because the employee is more productive. Okay. However, again, there are second and third order effects. So the second order effects are workplace displacement, like in the Square example where they fired 50% of, or they're laying off, the term du jour, they're laying off 50% of their workforce, and there can be cultural resistance. So a lot of people are very afraid of AI. They feel like it's a universally bad thing. I mean, I hear from time to time about on podcasts, oh, AI is terrible. It's this, it's that. Well, AI is like any other innovation. It's a tool. It can be used to do good things. It can be used to do bad things. I mean, tools are agnostic. You can use a hammer to build a house. You can use a hammer to, lahavdil, kill someone, right? So AI is no different in that respect. But for people who, don't want to open up their aperture, let's say, it can, these kinds of automation efficiencies, they approach them with a lot of resistance, and that resistance can spread within the entire company. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Square. Presumably, before they took this action, they socialized the idea of using more AI tools to increase efficiency, so as to avoid the sort of cultural resistance that might hamper the implementation of that policy. Okay, now, in this case, looking at it from this side of the example, the workplace displacement of bringing in AI, while it's a second order effect, it's one that's desirable for the company. So again, just because there's a second order effect doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just it's really something that's a result of a first order effect. Could be good, could be bad, could be neutral. Depends how it's viewed, depends how it's planned for. Again, this is why it's so important to examine these as different initiatives are taken in your business. So the third order effect in adopting automation could be increased regulatory scrutiny. It could be customer backlash. It could be a stagnation of innovation as people, grapple with the, with dealing with the adoption of automation, and an inability to really, do anything else. So let me give you another example where automation increases efficiency, but at the same time, there are second and third order effects. So here in the United States, one of the strongest labor unions is the Longshoremen's Union, and the longshoremen unload goods from ships. That's what they've done for hundreds of years. Okay, sometimes they're called stevedores. We call them longshoremen now. So the Longshoremen's Union, when their contract comes up for renewal, has consistently over the last, I don't know, at least 10 or 20 years that I've been following it, resisted greater automation at US ports. Now, if you look at ports around the world, most ports on other continents are more highly automated than US ports. There is a great deal of cultural resistance to automating ports in the United States because longshoremen look at it, and I think there is some legitimacy to this view. They look at it as at least in the future, there's going to be fewer longshoremen's jobs, right? If automation is being implemented, that means more can be done with the same or fewer workers. Here's the problem. US ports tend to operate much less efficiently than other ports, raising the cost of goods to all consumers, or I should say all consumers who are buying imported goods, right? And so here is, in the case of the longshoremen, the first order effect is the implementation of automation. The second order effect has been the development of a culture of resistance. The third order effect is, as a result, Americans in general pay higher prices for imported goods than they otherwise would have to if there were not this cultural resistance to further automation of US ports. Okay. Well, if you're a longshoreman, you probably say that's a good thing because, we want to support high-paying jobs, etc. If you're a consumer, you may say that's not a good thing because I don't want to have to pay more for imported goods, right? If you're someone who is opposed to importation of goods, so then the lack of automation, or the resistance to automation, you look at that as probably a good thing because that constrains, at least somewhat, the inflow of consumer goods. If you are a proponent of imported goods, maybe because you're an exporter, and so exports and imports tend to work together. So again, you probably look at the cultural resistance to further automation as a bad thing, right? So when I'm using the terms good and bad here, I'm not talking about sort of moral good and bad per se, although I suspect if you spoke to the various groups that I just mentioned, they would look on the good or bad. They look at it from moral terms. More or less imports, more or less automation. These are not moral questions, in the way that's been understood for for millennia, right? But they're good or bad from the perspective of people's interests, financial interests, that sort of thing. Okay, so the development of greater efficiency by using automation without having a transition plan for its implementation and for dealing with its impact is likely to cause instability in your business, right? So that's why, again, it's important to look at second and third order effects. Okay, next one, change. So I have a message here from Navtra Visas. Not sure who that is, saying excellent. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, so pricing changes. So pricing changes will alter customer behavior, right? There's that is, that's a given, right? So typically the first order effect of increasing prices is increasing revenue. Now, it is interesting because sometimes decreasing prices can cause revenue to go up. So, if you've looked at fast food over the last several years, the prices of fast food have crept up. And the same thing is true, by the way, of the snacks made by PepsiCo. So the prices have crept up. So PepsiCo has announced, I want to say a month or two ago, that they were going to lower prices. And I think the reason they decided to do that is because they're actually losing revenue at the price points that they've reached. Same for some of the fast food restaurants. So one of the advantages of fast food is beyond convenience is it's inexpensive. So when you raise the price above the level that a certain segment of consumers can afford to pay or is willing to pay, you're actually losing revenue, right? So that's why I talk about price changes as opposed to price increases. But the idea of changing prices is to maximize revenue. That's always the point, okay? But if we're talking about price increases as an attempt to increase revenue, and it might initially, as because people are used to buying the product, they haven't found an alternative yet, and they're unwilling to give it up. So in the short term, it may it may increase revenue, but as a second order effect, okay, it can reduce customer loyalty. Okay, now I'll give you an example for me. I look at the price of going to Disneyland today. It is enormous. I've always enjoyed going to Disneyland. Just it's too expensive. Sorry. I'm just not that loyal to pay that much. For a family of four, not that I have a family of four, but for a family of four to spend a day at Disneyland is literally thousands of dollars now between tickets and parking and food. The tickets themselves are one ticket is hundreds of dollars. I think that's inappropriate pricing for a venue, for a theme park from a company that supposedly is based on family experiences, right? So by increasing their prices the way they have, the Walt Disney Company has reduced my loyalty to the company. Okay. Another second order effect of increasing prices is it creates greater price sensitivity. So I know for me, eating out, I used to love eating out, but it's become so expensive. I'm very sensitive to the fact of how expensive it is. Whereas it was a nice thing to do, and it was maybe, it was more expensive than eating at home, but not so much more expensive that, I didn't do it maybe once or maybe even twice a week. Now it's rare that I go out to eat more than once or maybe twice a month because of the price sensitivity, right? It's so much less expensive to eat for me at home, number one. Number two, I can eat, in general, better quality food at home when I make it myself. It's fresh, whatever, right? And so the second order effect of the increase in dining and eating out is greater price sensitivity, right? And that eventually could translate into lower revenue. Okay. Now, the third order effects of price increases is number one, competitor entry. So if prices of one company go up so high, another competitor may look at that and say, "Hey, I've got an opportunity to gain business at their expense by maybe lowering my prices or by entering into their market where I wasn't before and essentially stealing some of their business," right? So this is kind of the flip side of that is a substitution behavior on the part of customers and clients who say, well, I'm going to look for something else that's maybe less expensive or maybe it's the same cost, but I'm getting a higher quality product for the same money. Okay. Other brands may look at repositioning themselves in order to take advantage of the price increases that one of the businesses, that another competitor is pursuing, right? So we in business, we can't raise prices in a vacuum. We have to understand the broader market and how are our customers and clients, how do we think they'll respond or react to a price increase? How will our competitors respond to a price increase on our part? By the way, how will they respond to a price reduction, right? If PepsiCo goes forward with the reduction, price reductions they're planning, what are other snack companies going to do? I'm trying to think of let's see, Frito-Lay is a PepsiCo company. So I think Sun Chips is as well. Trying to think of another snack company. I don't know. Hershey's is a snack company. What is Hershey's likely to do in response to PepsiCo reducing their prices, right? These are the kinds of questions, hopefully, senior leadership at PepsiCo has considered before embarking on this plan. Okay, that's number 3. Number 4, rapid expansion. Okay, so the benefits of rapid expansion are first order effect, market share growth, right? That's the idea. I use this example a lot because I'm such a fan of Krispy Kreme donuts, but Krispy Kreme's rapid expansion initially increased their market share. It grew tremendously. However, it diluted governance, and as a result, there was a second order effect of operational strain. They couldn't keep up with the rapid growth in terms of quality control, in terms of supplying machinery, in terms of supplying the various inputs to making Krispy Kreme donuts. So there was a tremendous amount of operational strain that came as part of Krispy Kreme's rapid expansion, right? And so then third order effects. There could be compliance failures, cultural fragmentation, strategic drift, and we actually saw all of those in as a result of Krispy Kreme's rapid expansion. So there were compliance failures, not in terms of regulatory compliance per se, although certainly Krispy Kreme did not live up to Wall Street's expectations, but there were compliance failures in the sense of they didn't keep up with their reputation for high quality products. Okay, so they didn't comply, if you will, with their own internal standards. There was also cultural fragmentation as the lack of adherence to standards became more broadly felt. So the devotion to Krispy Kreme started to water down. And so finally, you have this company that really was strategically adrift. It wanted to expand, but it couldn't accommodate the expansion, and it really kind of turned the company on its head. And it almost took the company down. They were smart enough to pull back from that rapid expansion, shrink the company, and work to rebuild. And of course, that's what they've done over the last 10 or 20 years, much to their credit. Okay, look, it's one thing to embark on a strategic initiative without considering second and third order effects. It's another thing to keep doing so despite recognizing that those second and third order effects are happening. And in the case of the management of Krispy Kreme, I think they did not consider second and third order effects. But once they saw them happening, they realized, oh boy, we need to pull back. And that's what they did. Okay. And I think in this go around, they're being much more they're being much more evaluative of second and third order effects. And so this time, as they expand, it's more measured, and they're being much more attentive to the culture and brand adherence that that they were heretofore known for. So I have a question here. Let's see. What is the malevolent second order effect you have seen in a business? Oh, the most malevolent second order effect you've seen in a business pivot. Wow, that's a great question. The most malevolent second order effect that I've seen in a business. Boy, that's I'll have to think about that. I'll address it before I end the show. That's a great question. Okay, so going back to rapid expansion diluting governance. So growth can change an institute faster than leaders anticipate, and so the proper planning on a growth initiative would be to say, what happens if if we don't grow the way we're anticipating? What happens if we grow according to plan? What happens if we grow slower than plan? What happens if we grow faster than we're planning, right? All four of those need to be examined in terms of the second and third order effects, right? And then whatever one comes up with, what kind of mitigation strategies can come up for dealing with potential second and third order effects. Okay, and then 5. This is the last of the 5 examples I have for looking at second and third order effects in a business. So public statements. Okay, so businesses often make public statements. Now, for publicly traded companies, of course, those public statements are made, typically quarterly. There may be quarterly earnings reports given. They're at least given annually, typically at some sort of annual meeting. Okay, but even closely held companies, meaning they're private companies, they make public statements. You see it more frequently these days, I think, really than ever before, partly because of social media. So you will see, people like, for example, Elon Musk will make, sort of public statements about his companies. He's gotten in trouble for doing so at times with regulators, but announcements will be made about by companies in social media. So the first order effect of these announcements, I mean, it really depends at whom they're targeted. If they're formal announcements made in quarterly earnings calls and that sort of thing, or at annual meetings, at public meetings, so they're probably aimed at investors, and they're looking to bolster investor confidence and momentum. Okay, and that can be a first order effect. Now, if it's a public statement that's made more to sort of customers or clients, so the public statement presumably is being made in order to engender greater client or customer loyalty, and assuming the statement was reasonably well planned, so then the first order effect would be to create greater customer client loyalty, right? So here's just a little example of this. So this morning I got a text message from a company from whom I get text messages. It's called Redland Cotton. So they make things like linens, towel, sheets, that sort of thing. And they're made from cotton grown in Alabama, woven in Alabama, and the sheets and towels and such are sewn in Alabama as well. In other words, they're 100% made in the United States, and in fact, I think the reason they're called Redland Cotton is they're made in Alabama. So I have a connection to Alabama because For those of you who watch the show, I always sign off with my tribute to Marie. Marie was a dear friend of mine who lived really her whole life in Alabama, right? So when I first heard about Redland Cotton, I got their sheets, and they're terrific. I love them. They're very comfortable. They get more comfortable every time they're washed, all that kind of stuff, right? So the text message I got today, which would be a kind of public statement, was they're celebrating their 10th anniversary, right? Well, that's cool, right? They've been in business for 10 years. Good for them, right? That little announcement. Now, of course, they're doing it in the hopes that people will celebrate their 10th anniversary by buying something. But it's also just, it's a neat thing. Here's this, brand that I really like, and they're letting me know, hey, we've been around for 10 years. Hey, good for you, right? That engenders a certain feeling from customers, okay, or customers like me who feel some kind of investment in the brand. That's a first order effect, right? Second order effect is heightened expectations, right? Okay, well, you've been around for 10 years now. So, I should be able to expect a clean delivery process, goods that don't have any defects. And by the way, to their credit, I've bought from them a few times, always gotten goods that were in no defects, defectless goods, and always delivered quickly, on time, no problems, right? Okay. So, but for maybe people who are newer to the brand than I am, oh, you've been around for 10 years. So the idea that they've been around for 10 years gives them sort of less margin for error in customer interactions than if they've been around for only a year, let's say. Okay. So a second order effect of public statements are heightened expectations, because a company is usually using those statements to create expectations. Now, here's where you can look at mitigating public statements. So if you're talking about, for example, an earnings call, a quarterly earnings call, where those earnings projections are set will set expectations. Okay. They may be heightened expectations, but they also may be lowered expectations, right? If the company says, well, due to the following factors, we're anticipating earnings that are flat with the previous quarter, or maybe, slightly lower than last quarter, right? A lot of discussions about tariffs over the last year or so, right? Maybe due to tariffs, our quarterly earnings are going to be lower this quarter than they were last quarter. Okay, that wouldn't be a call you would get today, but maybe that could have been something that was said, last year, right? So in that case, you're lowering expectations as part of your public statement to avoid the second order effect of heightened expectations, right? So this is where the mitigation strategy becomes important. And then third order effects. So you can have volatility when performance fails to match what the statement was saying, right? So go back to my example of Redland Cotton, give them another free plug, right? I don't know who owns it or anything. I just like the company. I think it's a cute name, Redland Cotton, and they make a great product. But let's say so here's they have one pattern of sheets. They call it their ticking design. Ticking, as in ticking, it was what historically covered a mattress. Ticking, right? So I have the charcoal gray ticking sheet, but they have red ones, right? But they're never available, right? So you would think, okay, after 10 years, right, you put out a great product, and then it's not available. People can't get it. It's a little frustrating, right? So I say that somewhat tongue in cheek, because it is a small company, and there were just a lot of people, I suspect, like me, who thought, oh, these are great, I'm going to buy them. I got in too late. So hopefully they're going to make more, right? And there'll be more to sell, right? But this is perhaps them, the company, not anticipating how much people would like these ticking design sheets, right? And not anticipating how quickly they would sell, and therefore they ran out. So, their initiative was they brought out a new design, they promoted it. I saw it, text messages for it quite frequently, and I just kind of ignored them because for whatever reason. And then when I happened to finally click through on one of them and see them and really like them, it was too late. I couldn't get them, right? And they probably didn't anticipate, as a second order effect, right, exactly how popular they would be, especially in the red color, right? Now, in retrospect, they might have thought, well, we're red land cotton, so the red is going to be popular. But I mean, these are the the issues when we're in business is we can't sometimes anticipate all the second and third order effects. So but we at least need to do our best to anticipate them, to put in mitigation strategies, so that in this last case, our public statements, as much as possible, are matched by our future performance, right? So we need to manage our communication, so that we don't constrain future flexibility or do damage to our reputation, damage to our brands, etc. Okay, so um, the sort of bottom line of second order effects is we need to exercise strategic discipline. So that means building contingencies, preserving reserves, sequencing our actions, and testing assumptions before execution. Okay, and so that may be doing modeling a particular action that we're contemplating taking in business, or figuring out, how will customers respond? How will investors respond to this? Thinking about, good, indifferent, or good, indifferent, bad, right? Those are all potential responses. So looking at phasing changes rather than making them rapidly, or conversely, in the example I gave of Square, not phasing them, just making the abrupt change, knowing there's going to be a second and third order effect, and endeavoring to get through it as quickly as possible to mitigate any potential downside. And finally, making sure we ask, what breaks next? Okay, so presumably we're taking an initiative either to fix something that's broken or to build our business, right? And so both of those follow on, they have inherent in them follow on questions. If we're launching an initiative to fix something that's broken, the follow on question should be, okay, what's going to break next after this is fixed? And start thinking about that before you initiate the fix to the current problem. If an initiative is being launched in order to enhance the business, so the questions need to be asked, okay, once this is launched, what is the next step to enhancing the business? Okay, and start thinking about that and planning for that before you launch the initial business enhancing initiative, so that they can work in concert, or hopefully there's a better chance they will work in concert. Okay, so again, disciplined, forward-looking leadership will always consider second order, third order effects, no matter what the size of your business is. Okay, let's see. Please do share your email. Okay. Okay. So thank you. First of all, thank you very much for joining me today. When this episode posts in YouTube, all my social media links will be there, and my email address is there in the show notes. So it'll be there, by the way, not just on YouTube, but it's there in Spotify and Apple Podcast, when this issue posts on those platforms as well. So if you want to reach me, you can always do so. You can post social media. You can send me a private like DM through LinkedIn, or you'll have my email address as well. Always happy to hear your comments, your criticisms, your ideas, your thoughts. Please share those with me. Be very grateful for that. We're coming up on time here. So I just want to thank you again for joining me today. And let's see, tomorrow at 10 a.m. is my show, People Making Money. And then every other Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time is my show, Jiggers' Place, where we have a cocktail and a schmooze and talk about all kinds of topics not related to finances. So several opportunities for us to be together every week, and I hope to see you again. So one last time, thank you so much for joining me. Navstra Visas, thanks for your comments. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing you again, and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.